All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our second ever webinar. Today we've got a very cool topic on actually a brand new metric that we're releasing called push-off strength. So we're going to go through a little bit of kind of educational material on what that is, what it means, and really how you guys can utilize it in practice. To really help your swimmers on a day-to-day basis. Really, before we get started though, we'll start with some quick housekeeping items. So, really, we welcome all of your questions. However, we do want you to reserve them until the end, just to try to keep things flowing and keep us on time. Please do submit all of your questions through the Q&A function that you will see on your screen. We will go through them in order until we run out of time. We'll try to fit everybody in, so not to worry there. We will be monitoring the hand raiser tool as well. So if you do wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature, and we can even try to fit it in during the conversation. And then if you do have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting at all, please do send us a chat message, and we will attempt to resolve it as quickly as possible. On top of that, we will be sending up a follow-up email with a link to watch the live recording of this, as well as a downloadable copy of the presentation and an additional infographic. So you will have all this information after the fact as well. So if there is any additional information beyond that you would like, though, absolutely do feel free to email us at info@TritonWear.com. We're here to answer your questions, so please do feel free to reach out at any time. We're here to help. So before we get going, my name is Tristan Lahari. I'm the co-founder and CEO of TritonWear. My background in the sport, I grew up competitive swimming. I was the former captain at the University of Waterloo swim team. Where I was also studying mechatronics engineering, so that's kind of where my background in technology started stemming from, where I then got to kind of marry the two together to build out this this idea and what our team's been able to develop to get us where we are today. Ultimately, I'm a natural problem solver. I guess I always try to see problems in various industries or in various things that I face on a day-to-day and try to fix them. And that's kind of where a lot of this started to stem from. Another thing we like to do every week, though, we do like to say something kind of funny about ourselves. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about my first year of swimming in university. Had a pretty stern coach in first year. Had a great relationship with him throughout the entirety of our first year, and then that kind of all crumbled down at our very final competition of the season, where I managed to false start leading up 4x200 freestyle relay, where he didn't talk to me for a couple of weeks. So that was definitely not the highlight of my career, but it was looking back, we can laugh at it. So that was a good experience for sure. Okay, so then today what we're going to do, as we did last week, we're going to go through a quick overview of TritonWear, just to give you guys a kind of summary for those of you that don't know the system and give you a little bit more insight into it very quickly. Then we're going to dive in right away on what is push-off strength, diving then into what affects push-off strength, exactly what it's measuring, and then trying to show you guys a little bit more about what that means and how you can benefit from it. Then we're going to open up the floor for a Q&A session where you can ask us basically anything you like. All right, so just to give you guys a quick overview on TritonWear itself, the TritonWear platform all begins with the Triton unit, which is a small device that hooks on the swimmer's goggles to capture their performance metrics based on their motion through the water. So we're capturing split times, stroke count, stroke rate, turn time, time underwater, push-off force, as you're learning about today, and many other metrics that you see listed up here. And we're doing so at 4 times the accuracy of the next best competitor. So we're have a high focus on providing highly accurate information to you guys. The next component of this is the mobile application. So all the data is streamed in real time to the mobile application for every athlete in the pool simultaneously. It's really giving you that real-time feedback, so you can just focus on coaching in your sessions and not have to worry about really digging through and staring at your stopwatch. Once the workout's over, that data is logged to each athlete's profile to provide you with long-term tracking and analytics, showing you exactly if athletes are improving, but more importantly, how they're improving, and really give you a bit more insight that you might not be able to get in practice, given the limited time constraints that you have. We also do have pro data in our system, so you can learn from the best in the world to see exactly what's going into some of those top swims out there globally. Okay, so now diving into push-off force. So basically, push-off force all begins with all of these different components of a turn. So, obviously this isn't new to any of you guys, but there's many different components to a turn. From the entry speed, the breathless entry and exit, turn speed, the hard push off, obviously, a tight streamline, strong kicks or pull out, as well as an explosive breakout. So there are many key components, but some of these are very hard to manage or or even measure for that matter. So push off force, this is really trying to solve one of those issues. So that whole concept of a hard push off has been something that's very challenging to measure. So that's really where we came up with this idea of trying to measure push-off force for you. So in terms of this push-off force or push-off strength, really what we're able to measure here is effectively the total acceleration of the athlete based on multiple data points. So there's easy ways to explain this. It's really just a measure of the effective speed at the time that they leave the wall. So it's really, your athletes are slowing down as soon as they leave the wall effectively. So it's really showing you that maximum speed that they're reaching as soon as they push off of the wall. So this is related to their speed, but it also does have some impacts of gravity as well as turn type. I'm going to come back to those in a couple of slides and dig into that a little bit more for you to explain how those things affect it and how you can use them to your benefit. So in terms of scoring, the push-off strength score itself that you'll be getting every single lap from your athletes is actually a relative number. So it starts at 0 if they have basically 0 push-off, all the way up to basically an indefinite number. So effectively climbing as the swimmer has a stronger and harder push-off. So ultimately, you can see here on the graph on the right-hand side some typical push-off strengths, a weak, medium, and fast push-off for a few different demographics. So what you can see here is that some of your, master swimmers, they might be having a bit weaker of a push off, a bit lower of a score rather, ranging from, maybe about 8 to 18 or so. But then all the way up to your kind of top sprinters, some of your young guys, they'll be getting scores, up in the 30s, and even some of your really fast guys will be getting up to the 40s. However, some of your weakest swimmers might not even get to 10. So it's an interesting number that it does give you some finite range that you can operate within. So in terms of, exactly how this works, it does capture some obvious problems that are happening with your athletes during their turns, things that aren't necessarily easy to quantify. It's a lot of things relative to technique, but not easily quantified as of today. So what it can bring up is showing you if an athlete's turning a bit too close to the wall and if their position leaving the wall is not good, right? It also tells you if you're turning a bit too early and obviously not getting a strong push off. They're kind of just shooting air at that time. So really, some of these highlights some other difficult to measure items, including the head position of the athlete during their turn, and then also importantly, the angle at which they're coming off the wall. So we can kind of give you insight into a whole bunch of different things depending on how you want to utilize it. So in terms of the other I guess, factors that I mentioned earlier, which can affect push-off strength results. So 2 of them here that I'm outlining are how gravity affect the push-off strength as well as turn type. So gravity is an interesting one. So basically you can utilize this to your benefit. Effectively, if they're pushing off on a downward angle, you'll get a little bit of a lower result. And if you are pushing off on an upward angle, you'll get a bit of a higher result. So what that means is really if you're getting a result in terms of the push-off force, which is out of the range of what you're seeing on that previous slide. So if it's kind of substantially higher and you're seeing kids getting 50s or whatnot when they shouldn't be, it's likely because they're pushing off a bit too high out of the water or off the wall, and you're likely going to see that impact their underwaters. So you're likely going to be seeing a shorter period of time underwater, and you're likely going to see their stroke count increase over the length that they're swimming at that point. Also, if their head is up during the turn, you'll also be able to see that. In terms of your turn type and how that will impact things, ultimately the open turn in general just has a slightly lower result. This is just generally because effectively we just generally see athletes pushing off at a bit of a deeper angle on open turns compared to flip turns, but you will just notice that. The nice thing is it is always a relative measure for each of your athletes. So the athlete, as they swim, you'll be able to measure that effectively on a turn-by-turn basis, and they can very easily see if they're improving based on things that you're trying to implement throughout your sessions. Okay, so then in terms of how you can act on these numbers, this is kind of obviously the most important piece. So what can I do with the push-off force information that we're now getting? So one of the big things that you'll be able to see, one of the cool things you'll see over the course of time and over the course of the workout is really seeing how that number changes, right? So when a swimmer's fresh, when a swimmer's feeling good, you're going to see their maximums effectively. They're going to see their best push-off forces. One of the interesting things is when you're doing a long, hard set, you're going to see that push-off force likely decrease over the course of that set. And the interesting piece after that is you're going to start to see other metrics suffer. So it's really effectively, it's a balance between all of your metrics. If an athlete starts to have their push-off force decrease significantly over the course of a set, they're going to have to make up for that with other metrics. So they're either going to have to add more strokes or ramp up their stroke rate to make up that time, or do something else. So effectively, if they're trying to maintain a specific pace and their push-off force is decreasing, they're going to have to find ways to correct that in other ways. So it'll give you a bit more insight to explain to your athletes, okay, if you're able to manage and maintain that push-off force, you can actually put less work in throughout the rest of the length. So it's a way that you can give some pretty easy feedback over the course of a hard workout or a hard set. Also, other pieces, you might see if your stroke count is increasing and your push-off force is increasing, you might see that, okay, they're maybe just getting too deep into the wall. So if they're getting too deep into the wall, they're likely, they might get a strong push off, but they're likely going to be pushing off pretty high, out of that turn. So they're likely going to have a pretty short underwater. So effectively, you might see that number go up, but it might be, actually a negative connotation at that point. So you might see that actually gets their underwaters decreasing in terms of quality. And then, you're going to see more strokes taking that length, and it's just going to be an overall less efficient length. So it can give you a few different indicators in that respect. In terms of why is my push-off strength, getting lower, there's many reasons why that can be. If a swimmer has, effectively, I guess a short burst kind of turn and push off, they might be spending more time on the wall to get a high force, but it might not actually be an efficient turn in and of itself. So ultimately, they might not have effectively as strong of or high of a velocity leaving that wall. Ultimately, if you're seeing that, all of your different tricks and everything are, still not producing effectively higher scores, what you might see is that your athlete might just not be consistent in terms of what they're doing throughout their turns. So especially with your more junior athletes, you might see some inconsistencies with how they're doing their turns or how they're doing their push-offs and how they're actually leaving the wall. So that can be just caused by general inconsistencies. So it can flag a whole bunch of different things. These are just a few examples, but again, the nice thing is these numbers are relative for your athletes, so you can effectively try different solutions for each of your athletes to see really what resonates with each of them and be able to optimize their turns, their underwaters, and also their effective above water swimming as well, as there are so many interdependencies while they're training. So in terms of utilizing the technology to help you in this, it will give you guys a way to effectively track this data. It'll also give visibility to your athletes. It'll help them understand, okay, if I do something on my wall is a little bit different, this is what I'm going to see, right? It'll give you a lot more visibility. It'll also just get your athletes a little bit more engaged in what they're seeing on the page throughout the workout. It'll also allow you to pay attention, to your swimmers, as they're leaving the wall and focus on really finite components of their turns, which are not that easy to quantify today, besides taking their time in and out of the wall and trying to optimize on that. So it lets you really focus on kind of some of the finite details that are really hard to quantify today. This will also just allow you to help focus on perfecting your turns and your strength, and just make sure that you can guarantee and maximize the amount of speed you're getting off your walls. Because as I mentioned before, your highest speed is as soon as you leave the wall. From then on, you're just slowing down. So if you can maximize and optimize that speed leaving the wall, you can effectively optimize the rest of that length. So that push-off is a very critical component of the rest of your length. The nice thing is this will just help you dig in as well on the rest of your skills on your turn, whether that's your turn angle, your feet plant on the wall, your turn speed, what have you. All of these things will impact the quality of that push-off force, and it'll give you a bunch of different indicators that are really just not that easy to get today. All right, so that was a quick breeze through. We had a bit of a quick session today, just going through one of our brand new metrics. One of these metrics that's really just not easy to capture. So what we're going to do now is, I'm sure you guys will have questions. So we're going to open up the floor for some Q&A. So what I'll do is I'll just leave this to you guys. If you want to type in the Q&A section, please do now, and we'll basically keep the floor open for a period of time to give you guys an opportunity to ask your questions. All right, so how I kind of explained it briefly before, the relative number, for those of you that, I guess you can't see this question, so the question here, sorry, is asking how exactly is the relative number calculated? So effectively what we're doing here is we're calculating their speed leaving the wall. So it's effectively integrating their acceleration leaving the wall from all different directions. So it's giving you a measurement of their actual effective speed leaving the wall. So it's based off of the motion sensors that we use and the data that we're capturing, which allows us to capture that. And then we do have another question here saying, what do the relative numbers correspond to? So again, this is effectively corresponding to their effective speed leaving the wall. It is a combination of all axes, so that is an important thing to keep in mind. So it is their effective speed leaving the wall. But again, it is really just designed to be a finite number. So effectively, it's trying to just give you a finite number of their effective speed leaving that wall. So another question that we have here is, can you find the optimal distance after the push-off to the surface without losing any speed? So this is a very interesting problem, or a very interesting question. You know, the whole concept of optimizing underwaters for athletes is definitely a very critical piece these days. You know, that's tied to actually a few other variables as well, where you're talking about their speed underwater, the speed that they're maintaining underwater, as well as the distance that they're traveling underwater and the time underwater, which then combines with this push-off force to give you the kind of the whole picture. So right now we provide you with the push-off force and the time underwater. The others we are working on and is in our roadmap. So right now you can utilize this to effectively attempt to optimize that distance after the push off, but really what you're going to see there, you're going to have to do it a little bit by eye as well. You can't do it all just by numbers at this time, but once we do have speed underwater, you'll get a lot more information to optimize that distance underwater, as it will be different, you know, depending on the athlete and their strengths, as I'm sure you know. Question on, will this work off of the start? Yes, it does work off of the start, so it will give you information off of the start as well. So it will help you optimize as well the effective strength of their starts. So the way that we calculate it is in meters per second, but we do scale it to provide it a bit more of a high scale, because kind of what you'll see is, you know, most athletes won't get to anything beyond 4 meters per second pushing off a wall. So we're trying to just make it a bit of a larger scale, but it is effectively giving you, you know, a scaled version of their speed in meters per second off the wall. No problem. All right. Any other questions, anybody? We do have some more time. Oh, here we go. Yes. So a question here: is the metric ready to be used? The answer is yes. It actually is released now. So if you have the latest updates on your units, the latest firmware updates on your units, you know, please do update the units and update your application. You will see the push-off force now being measured and displayed every single length for your athletes. So we have one question here, speed off the wall after how long their feet have lost contact. So basically it's the maximum speed. So it's effectively that maximum acceleration, and then in terms of that speed that they achieve as they leave the wall. So it's like generally right as they're leaving the wall, it would be that maximum speed event before they start slowing down effectively. Another question here, what do you mean by leaving the wall at a high angle or low angle? So what I mean by that is if you're pushing off, you know, heavily downwards or pushing off highly upwards. So effectively what you'll see is if you have an athlete that has maybe a turn that gets too deep in the wall, and maybe they push off and kind of launch themselves up at a high angle out of the water, you might see kind of a crazy score that's a bit too high, but that's basically an indicator that they pushed off too high and basically probably ruined their underwater at that time. and then push off deeper is effectively just if they're pushing off deeper into the water. Okay, so another question here. So yeah, some have taught us that angling down is better for underwater push-off, and you're saying that this decreases the push-off power. So what I'm getting at here is that ultimately it is a balance between your metrics. So it's not the be-all and end-all metric. You do have to utilize it while looking at their time underwater, which is another metric that we provide. So effectively, if you're seeing a specific score for an athlete, and that's getting them their ideal time underwater and their ideal underwaters, then it's a score to target for. So effectively, that's what that's explaining there. It's something that we're able to adjust in the future, something that we have talked about, reducing that effective gravity. But as of right now, it's effectively you're trying to find that perfect push-off force for your athletes, especially at the higher levels. Yeah, so a question we have here as well, when looking at the metrics and all the other metrics that we offer, as we do have a bunch of different metrics, sometimes it gets to be using too many metrics at once. So this is a good question. It's definitely important not to get bogged down in the numbers and not to dive into every single data point, every single practice. What we usually do with our coaches, we're trying to recommend specific metrics that you focus on at different times. So basically, what are you trying to achieve with your athletes in the short term and in the long term? And what would you like to track to do that? So, some athletes, it's, really trying to optimize on their rates. Some athletes, it's really trying to fix their walls. So based on what you're trying to focus on each given athlete and what they're trying to improve upon, that's usually what we recommend, because we know it's too much to try to track a bunch of data all the time. We just give you all that data in case you need it. So effectively, honing in and focusing in on a specific data point for a period of time is really what we find the most effective. And we also find it very effective for the athletes, as it makes it very easy for them to digest and follow that information. So a good example of that is we've had many customers starting to use our one metric called stroke index, which is effectively a measure of the athlete's efficiency, basically by combining their speed and their distance per stroke. So effectively, how fast you're traveling with your stroke and how far it's taking you. So that's one metric that we're finding coaches and athletes really enjoying to hone in on, because it does combine a few different things and it gives them a single number to track over a period of time. As you start to optimize a specific metric and as you see it improving, then you can start to add in other components. So you say, okay, maybe my stroke's now getting much more efficient. Now what I really need to work on are my walls. And now it's like, okay, let's focus on our time underwater and our push-off force. Let's hone in on those two pieces, and we'll try to basically just maintain our efficiency while improving those other components. So it's really just about really trying to focus and optimize, based on your athletes and yourselves, to make sure that it's obviously productive time. Yes, absolutely. So another question here in reference to the stroke index measure, a higher number is better. That's the question. And that is correct. A higher number, the better. So basically what it's doing is it's multiplying your distance per stroke times your speed. So you want a higher distance per stroke at higher speeds. So we really want you going further with every stroke and doing so at higher speeds. So really what you're looking for is a higher measure. So if you're looking at some of our race analyses that you've probably seen, you'll see some of the top guys in the world with powerful strokes, like Matt Horton and Sun Yang, and those guys will get stroke indexes up to about 5.5 or 6. And you'll see, others obviously aren't getting to that number, but that's one of the higher numbers that we see. So yeah, the higher the number, the better, and that's definitely a nice number to torque on with your athletes. All right, any other questions here? We're going to keep the floor open here still for a few more minutes, so please feel free. Any questions at all? Doesn't necessarily have to be related to what we're talking about today, so feel free to shoot any questions you might have. And also, in the meantime, while you guys are typing there, one of the things we are curious about, if you would prefer, shorter, more frequent webinars where we kind of cover relatively short topics, like today, for example, was a relatively short topic. Would you guys prefer shorter topics on a regular basis? Or would you prefer us to go deeper and spend a longer period of time on these deep topics, kind of on a less frequent basis? Shorter. Okay, so one for shorter topics. So that's great to hear. We know you guys are busy, so that's we don't want to take up too much more of your time than you guys have to offer. Okay, great. So we've been getting some good feedback on that as well. Great. It seems most people are enjoying shorter individual topics on a bit more of a regular basis. So that's good to hear. Okay, any more questions on anything at all? Feel free to shoot. We'll keep the floor open for maybe another minute or so before we wrap things up. And again, I will be, we'll be recording this. We will be sending this out for you guys so that you can, review it a second time. We'll send out the presentation as well, so you can have a bit more detail on what we talked about today. And then you can, again, feel free if you have any other questions that pop up, throughout the rest of the week. Do feel free to reach out to us at info@TritonWear.com. So a question here, did we get metrics from nationals? Not as of yet. It's not something that we were analyzing. We likely will be doing some stuff, for Worlds. So we will keep an eye on that. If you do have specific races you're looking to get analyzed, do feel free to reach out. We will, we can basically take that into consideration, try to prioritize specific races if you guys are looking to get them analyzed. So do let us know. No problem. All right, 200 free men from Worlds. Okay, we've got that logged down. That's a request, so we'll put that in. I assume you mean from Worlds coming up this summer. Perfect. All right, we'll definitely log that down. It should be an exciting race. All right, everyone. Well, I think that basically wraps it up for us. So if you don't have any last minute things, I do appreciate you guys, coming out and, having this with us. Oh, we do have one last question. What's your next metric coming in? So we do have a few in the pipeline right now. So I don't know that we're releasing that quite yet, but we do have some other good information that we have been working on our underwaters, but we don't have a specific date for that yet. So I don't want to say things too fast before the rest of the development team gets angry at me. But we will definitely keep you guys posted. If you do want to keep in touch, obviously make sure you subscribe to our newsletters. That's where we're going to be releasing more information on new metrics coming out, new case studies, new use cases on how to best utilize that information to your benefit efficiently in practice. So definitely stay tuned with everything. We'll keep you guys posted as it comes. All right, well, that's pretty much everything for us. So thank you again, and definitely come back next week. We're gonna keep various webinars going as we go. So we'll keep you guys posted. Again, stay tuned on our newsletter, and then I'll tell you when the next webinar is coming out. All right, thank you very much, and we will talk to you guys soon.